Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who may not know much, but he does know we're not looking for Charlie Chaplin.
Tim Longo. No. Oh my God, when that... Oh my goodness.
I had to go straight there. I knew you'd like that.
It's good.
I had some others that were taken directly from the game, direct quotes, but that having texted with you about this game today, I had to go there.
There are too many quotes.
There are a lot of quotes that you could put in here, because you could also be looking for some sailors.
Hey, what game are we talking about?
We are, of course, introducing our new series because we've put WoW aside so that we can level a bit. We are now talking about 1999's Shenmue, I believe is how it's pronounced. I've never known how to pronounce it, but that's how I pronounce it. So send your email to hatemail@devgameclub.com. I think that's right. It's not only is it its 20th anniversary this year, and basically just a couple of weeks ago as far as the American release goes. Shenmue 3 has also just come out in the last few weeks. So it seemed like a good time to look back at kind of a strange chapter, especially for a lot of reasons.
So many.
When this game came out, so many reasons. I mean, not just the game itself, which we'll talk about, but also just what it was at the time it was and who it came from. Like, there's a lot that just makes this game seem a little bit strange, but we should first at least set the scene a little bit about 1999 in video games. You got a list there in front of you. I've got a few jotted down that I thought were worth noting.
Yep, for sure. I mean, the obvious ones that we would want to talk about were the ones that we've played for the podcast to be clear and get those out of the way, including System Shock 2, Planescape Torment, I believe, right?
Yep. Correct.
And the third is escaping me.
Soul Reaver, Legacy of Kain.
Soul Reaver, right. Yep, Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. EverQuest came out in this year, which we've talked a little bit about in the previous series. A pretty successful sequel to Rainbow Six, Rogue Spear, came out. And so that was sort of, Rainbow Six was kind of at a peak, I would say, at that point. Counter-Strike, but I'm not sure which version that is. But it was around that time, I remember. Let's see. Alien vs. Predator, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Team Fortress Classic I wanted to specifically mention too, because that's really, as far as like a team-based shooter perspective, that's one of the, and that started as a mod, as we talked about, I think, in one of our series. I don't remember which one, maybe the Half-Life, or Quake, but that was a genre sort of creating one. And then as far as Final Fantasies goes, it looks like 8 was the year for
8 came out this year. I've got some other titles that I picked out that I thought were interesting from the year. The original Medal of Honor.
Okay.
Kind of started off that whole military shooter thing that we live with today. The Longest Journey, an adventure game, another adventure game at the time, which sort of ties in a little bit with this, because this is at least in part an adventure game, but definitely Longest Journey kind of in the older mold, the Scum or Sierra style. Unreal Tournament,
right?
Homeworld, game I remember quite enjoying, and also the original Silent Hill, the first Silent Hill.
Yep, I missed that one. I was going to mention that one, and also Super Smash Brothers.
Yes,
and Mario Party.
Yes, 2, Mario Party 2.
Oh, I see Mario Party here as well. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
Maybe both then. But yeah.
And then the other Dreamcast title, which the Dreamcast as a system actually also launched here in the U.S. that year, and I think this game would have been then basically a launch title with the U.S. version of the Dreamcast. Crazy Taxi was another title from this year that I played. An awful lot of, as did many on the Starfighter team at the time. That was a constant thing. The number of times I heard that song that goes, yeah.
Yeah. That was classic.
That was always playing in the area.
On the Dreamcast train, though, we should also mention Soul Calibur, which was also a Dreamcast kind of like killer app.
Right. Yeah. Soul still burns.
Yeah. So
and that's still going today. So another time, we probably won't get around to a fighting title anytime soon again. But this was, you said, the most expensive game ever developed at the time.
Yeah, and I do remember the hubbub about that a couple of years afterwards, and then sort of doing some minor amount of research ahead of time. It definitely is confirmed. Still kind of has one of those, and obviously since then we've the budgets keep bloating, and probably every year there's a new winner of that one. But nobody's supplanted this one for quite a while. And the range, though I don't know why there's a range and not an exact number, maybe it just wasn't fully released, but it was somewhere between 47 and 70 million. And so in 1999, that's just crazy and unheard of. That's marketing and production. So, but it kind of had a bit of a legendary feel about it because of both the cost and sort of the development being so crazy for them, and then also from a commercial perspective, it wasn't a success either. So it didn't make its money back anyway. So though obviously it has its cult following and is beloved by many, it seems, enough for 2 sequels.
And it's been ported multiple times as well. It was I believe it was on Xbox Live Arcade. I feel like this is the game that they bumped the headroom on how much memory a download could be. I may be wrong about that. Huh? What's that?
It might have been. I don't recall.
I don't specifically remember what game it was. I was wondering if it was this one, but I do think it came in on XBLA, and of course it's available on PC now. I'm playing it on the PS4.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm playing on PC, and is your aspect ratio working fine on the PS4? As far as like
it is.
Okay, yeah, I can't.
Yeah, it seems to be.
Can't figure mine out. I'm kind of squished, so it's irritating me. So I'm just curious. It looks like the PC port was not as good. I'm playing on Steam, so
yeah,
was not as good as the others. So yeah, I think. Go ahead.
I was going to go to Yu Suzuki as well.
That's where I was going. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's from legendary designer Yu Suzuki, who prior to this I think was much more known for what you'd think of as action and arcade titles. He, I mean, I've certainly have played going all the way back to Hang On, which was the motorcycle sim eraser, Space Harrier, which makes an appearance in this game. Actually, so does Hang On, or Super Hang On. One of them does. I didn't try to play that one, but I did play a game of Space Harrier.
Yeah, I did.
In the arcade. What else was I specifically going to mention? The Virtua games, Virtua Racing, Virtua Fighter,
Outrun,
Afterburner. And Afterburner. Yeah, I mean, he is, and a ton of other things. Like, I mean, he's got dozens of games to his name. He's a legend. And so many of these are really good arcade titles that it is uniquely strange to me, looking back again at his list, like, how does this game come from him? Just a strange thing. So,
it definitely feels like
he's done the other 2 as well. So,
yeah, it definitely feels like a left turn, and I don't know. I didn't have time to like read up on interviews and stuff where he has maybe talked about the genesis of it, but sometimes somebody who is focused so much on action games, that might be what they kind of fell into, but. They might have had other passions, and maybe this was sort of more of a passion project. But, I think the interesting thing to call out about the budget, and I'm not blaming Shenmue for this, but there's a bit of a sort of mentality that Sega was going through, because to your point about like the importance of this kind of slice of time for the industry is Sega, and Sega's and the Dreamcast, right? Which ultimately failed. And there's all sorts of info out there about that, but is this game and the commitment and the resources to such a specific thing an example of sort of what was going on in one of the big companies at the time, just a weird time in general. And then having this game in and amongst that time is very intriguing to me, on all sorts of levels, like you said. So,
I will say it is the first title from Suzuki where he is listed not only as the director or producer, but as the writer. So maybe this is a story he just always felt like it was a thing that he needed to tell. Hard to say, and I haven't gone and tracked down any. Yeah, I have not gone looking for any information about that. But I could see that being the case. I should note that if this is kicking off any kind of series for us, Yu Suzuki has described after Shenmue 3 that 40% of Ryo's story has been told. So we've got some more. More time. That means there will be 7.5 games. So I assume one of them will just be 1.5 times the size of one of these.
Clearly, he's got something on his mind.
Clearly,
holy cow!
Or I don't know. Maybe he just is like, if I tell them this, I mean, he's no spring chicken anymore. I mean, he's just putting it out there as like, I'm never going to finish this. I'll tell him it's 40%.
That old chestnut.
Who knows? I wish him well. I hope he gets to tell the whole story of Ryo. Well, let's, unless you have anything further to talk about as far as 1999 goes. Yeah, I mean, this is the hardware, or possibly also the software, that made Sega a software only company. I think they actually continued as an arcade manufacturer after this, so it's not entirely true to say they're no longer a home hardware manufacturer after this point. Right. So no, I don't think there's. I mean, we've talked about 99. This is our 4th time now, so I think there's. We probably hit all the topics, and I think the really important part about it related to this game we hit, and that's really the Sega angle and the Dreamcast angle, which and the Dreamcast, similar to this game, also sort of still has a cult following. And there's plenty of good reasons for that, and there's plenty of good reasons for people celebrating the anniversary for it as well right now. So it just whatever, the math didn't work out for him, unfortunately, and that console was a very interesting experiment in a few different ways. So you got to hand it to him for that. Yeah, and it had an experimental library as well. I mean, they had a lot of the sort of arcadey titles. I mean, we mentioned Crazy Taxi, but I definitely remember that being sort of a thing. I seem to remember it had a pretty decent RPG. Was that maybe Blue Dragon, a JRPG?
Blue Dragon, I think, was Xbox.
That's the Xbox one. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the
folks, but
I can't remember the name of the title of the Dreamcast.
Wasn't oh shoot, not Dragon Quest, but wasn't Phantasy Star like a big
Phantasy Star? Yeah, it's one. There was like Phantasy Star 2 maybe was on the thing.
Because one of the things that they were trying to push hard with this was
Sonic game right at the beginning as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Sonic 3D, was it, or Sonic CD or something?
It was a Sonic Adventure, but yeah, it was
Adventure. Right,
he was running into the screen or whatever.
Right, with which also has a bit of a following.
Blue Stinger was the game I was thinking of.
Oh, okay.
It was an action adventure game with kind of a horror game. That's the one I was actually thinking.
Got it. Yeah,
that was at launch. I knew it had blue in the title. It could not come up with it.
You were close. But the Dreamcast also was experimenting with connectivity, right, too.
Yes.
And that's why I mentioned Phantasy Star, because that was sort of console, sort of Diablo MMO-ish kind of early kind of stuff, right? And so you could hook and PlayStation 2 could as well, but it was a little more cumbersome, and I think you needed that adapter and stuff. But the Dreamcast had a port, on built into the console itself. And then it had that crazy little card what was it called? VMU or something.
Yep.
It was in the controller, that you could both play little games on, but also it was your memory card, had a little digital readout display. So yeah, very experimental and weird and intriguing thing. And then that is a good segue back to the game, which is all of those same things.
Yeah. Did you mention the fishing controller?
Oh, right. Wasn't Seaman also on the Dreamcast?
Seaman was also on the Dreamcast, and that was the other really experimental title. A lot of and Samba de Amigo as well. The Shakers, they had a lot of weird stuff on this system. Also Rez
was originally on the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Or at least no, I think around the same time. I can't remember if it was originally on or not. I mean, I also had Ikaruga. I mean, there were a lot of interesting titles that were on this thing. It was definitely an interesting system.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of crazy, great, interesting games, and a lot of games that did not make it over to the US. I'm looking at the whole list here. I'm like, there's no way there was this many titles on the Dreamcast, and then I look at how many of them are never released in anywhere but Japan, which was actually this may be a thing we never really talked about. This was sort of, I think, the console generation where American sales started to be a much bigger deal.
Mm-hmm.
So the PlayStation 2 coming out like a year plus afterwards, about a year afterwards, I guess. It was in 2000, late 2000 in the US. So it was that sort of transition where it became truly an international thing. I think Japanese manufacturers always thought of the Japanese market as being the primary market for them, and that's something that wouldn't change until the Xbox. That would truly be a global phenomenon. But anyway, it was certainly an interesting time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, yeah, and then I guess, jumping into the game itself, and we talked about this, I think, as we introduced it last episode, that we were going to be playing this game. Neither of us have played it. To be honest, I had always known that it was a bit of a cult classic and had all of this sort of myth around it, from a development perspective and from a player perspective. And I'd heard various sort of anecdotes when it comes to some of the topics that we're going to get into, this episode and beyond, whether it comes to world structure and open world, kind of early open world, and even weather and sort of some of the mechanical stuff. But I've never played it, and I never really fully understood what it was either. When people would describe it to me, or I'd see a video or something, it looks enough like other things that I would sort of graft those other things onto it, and unfairly. But, now that I'm playing it, when I first started, I definitely was in a state of mind of like, what the heck is going on? What is this thing? You know me, and it's like the camera's terrible, and just like I just wasn't getting it, and you mentioned adventure games earlier, and I think that's a good pull because there is a lot of adventure structurally to what's going on. And you mentioned something like The Longest Journey coming out in the same year, which was, it could be seen as one of the most, beloved sort of traditional adventure games. Right. When it comes to perspective and structure and how you interact with it and user interface. And I do get a very adventure-y feel from this, but it's just unlike anything, and
right.
I just kept thinking time and time again as I started this game of like, they started from scratch, even from a genre perspective. I feel like, like, what is it? It's hard to classify.
Yeah, I think it's I was going to look for the acronym. I believe the term you're looking for, this new genre that it created, is the full reactive eyes entertainment, or free.
What?
Yes.
What? You just made that up. What are you talking about?
I did not. Sega described Shenmue as belonging to this new genre.
That's called free?
Free, full reactive eyes entertainment. Yeah, it's not a good acronym. I don't know what they were thinking. But yeah.
I've never heard that. That's so funny.
I vaguely remember that from the time. You had mentioned the marketing. I do think this one was one that actually had television commercials, which would have been a big deal at the time. So there's probably a substantial amount of marketing in that very large budget you talked about. Because I do remember it being a thing that was on TV. That was definitely a yardstick at the time of like, oh man, that thing actually has a commercial, and there were not a lot of games that did. That you would see. Anyway,
well, and I think since then, and we talked about this a little bit in pre-show. There's been things that have started to really dabble heavily in this area, but there wasn't really much at the time. And I'm sure the audience will think of examples that we're not thinking of or have experienced them. But, it's very simulation centric, life simulator. And, maybe we can start there. I don't know where we want to start topics wise.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. I mean, so far we've only spent time in the kind of little town around Rio. I keep just calling him Rio because I can't remember his last name already because that's me. Hazuki. So Ryo Hazuki, we should probably set up how the game begins before we even get into the life simulation, just to set the stakes.
It's a cold open, so it's it bears.
Yeah, you go straight into a scene in which a gentleman comes to the dojo and home of Ryo Hazuki and his father. Apparently, also have, I guess, an attendant. Is that a maid? I guess. Ine-san, and a pupil of the school, Foko-san. Anyway, this fellow comes to the dojo and proceeds to demand from Ryo's father the dragon mirror. And if he's not given the dragon mirror, he will kill Ryo, who he has lifted up off the ground by his throat. He'll kill him right then and there. They end up. I guess there was a little bit of a fight before that, and the father gives up the dragon mirror. That's about what I can remember before he is killed. Do you remember anything else going on there? Is that basically it?
No, that's it. I mean, that was one surprise for me is the cold open, right? Just this straight into some action, all non-interactive and cinematic, right? And so you're watching this happen, and building up this mystery behind this person, of course, the villain or what have you, and then I think I definitely can always appreciate when player motivation and character motivation is established immediately, because it then obviously becomes a revenge story for Ryo. And so I definitely was not anticipating that. And again, it's, I think, because of my own bad assumptions, that I thought this was much more of a slow, methodical game that had really nothing like that. Because you always hear the sort of stories of things that I don't think we've gotten to yet, of using forklifts and walking, which, we haven't done that yet, but I'm sure it's coming. But it was kind of neat to see sort of this intrigue right away.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very appreciative of that, because I think a lot of games spend entirely too much time setting up the world and what's going on in it, and sometimes there's reasons for that. There's tutorialization, but I don't think you need to tutorialize and have your story start boring. I think you can tutorialize in the context of something interesting happening. And here, this game has very little in the way of tutorialization, first of all. So it's not even trying to bite that off. But it does, it does have a little bit with like, oh, you can look around the environment in this way and sort of thing. But it starts right in the middle of the most important action of Ryo's life. Long before this young man starts looking for sailors, he is confronted with the death of his father at the hands of this mysterious figure. And he gets some clues, right? They seed the sort of initial steps of the game in terms of what you're going to be looking for and trying to find out right there. You see a black car, you see the two thugs that are with this mysterious figure there as well. I guess you get his name as well. His name's like Landy or something like that, mm-hmm. or Dan Lee or something like that. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely a sort of classic martial arts revenge story being set up here, but it's also setting up you only know a few things about these people, so if you're going to do detective work, you have somewhere to start. So it both serves as a getting you directly into the action and motivating the character, but also motivating the initial play, which is a good double whammy in those first few minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's simple, clear. Revenge stories are easy to understand, and as we've talked about various times on the podcast, I think I also always appreciate where the motivations and the information that the player and the character have are as close together as possible. The player has just as much information about what's going on as Ryu does, apparently, because he doesn't really understand. So you are, you're discovering this as it goes. And in that case, it allows him to be a character, even though you're playing him as an avatar. So he has his own opinions about stuff and such, but still he doesn't have the information that he has just as much as you do. So I think that's always good when it comes to mystery motivated stories like this, where essentially it seems like, I'm guessing the whole game will be very much about just peeling the layers of the onion and the mystery of that. And you're just kind of going deeper and deeper. And the world structure, relates to that too, in a nice way. Cause once you eventually leave the dojo to kind of like, he wakes up, he kind of has a mourning period, it seems like. And then he wakes up one morning and then decides he's going to go, figure out if he can find something more about what happened. But it very nicely starts you in a smaller part of town, that's not very big, doesn't have many streets. And then it goes to a slightly bigger one and then into the biggest one we've been into. So it's nice, nicely sort of doled out to you, I thought, as well, from sort of like district to district.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with that. It does sort of slowly introduce you to the world. I also like that they've basically eluded all of the actual mechanics of mourning, right? You don't have to do the funeral and the and whatever things like that. Time has passed. Enough has passed that whatever other things has happened to him, all that is left to show its damage on Rio is a Band-Aid on his cheek, which is just funny to me. Okay. I mean, it's good character design. There's a little asymmetry to the face, even though the face is otherwise symmetrical.
It's a little reminder too, right?
He will only take off that Band-Aid. I hope he has it in Shenmue 3. He'll only take off that Band-Aid when his vengeance has been had.
If we're still figuring out if this is still a revenge story in Shenmue 3, then something might have gone wrong.
Yeah, it's possible.
I hope that there's some arcs being concluded here and there, but anyway, I don't think I will ever see that. So I will just hope that we get some conclusion in this one.
I mean, you do basically get a sense in that first house. I mean, it does kind of open up the game to you a little bit at a time. You can walk around in the house as much as you want. You do have some of the somewhat pointless interaction that we should probably talk about. Drawers that you can open and rooms that you go into that there's nothing to do in, but it's apparently a house, or a reasonable house for someone at this time. It's in 1986, I think. And you can go into the kitchen and you can. I really liked this touch as well. It's a second cutscene that happens pretty fast. If you focus on the breakfast that's on the table, and you look at that, you get a little cutscene of him with his father when he was just a little kid. Oh, okay, yeah. And there's another one in the outside with the.
I got that one. Yeah,
with the tree. Yeah,
yeah.
So there are these little reminders. You're getting this sense of the character, like this is all he's going to think about now. Everywhere he looks, there's going to be memories of his father and of what his father meant to him and how his father taught him. So it really reinforces this relationship. I mean, this is pretty literary for a game of 1999. I mean, it's not complicated, but it's doing a lot of things that games of this time would not have done.
No.
So it does really even stand out from that standpoint.
Especially from a pacing perspective. Yeah, I made the joke to Brett talking about some of the sort of just early interactions that you can have in the house. I made a joke to Brett in pre-show that, one of the early criticisms of Red Dead Redemption 2 from some of the early sort of tutorialization and forced objectives that you have in that game require the player to open drawers very slowly and methodically and check every drawer to find what you're looking for, et cetera, et cetera. And they were doing it in 1999. And so I did, while I was waiting for time to pass, which we can talk about in the future at some point, I decided to just scour the house and open literally every drawer. And, it's, I guess I just didn't do enough reading up on the game because it is very, very simulation centric. I get a little bit of Trespasser vibes from it sometimes, where you're holding things in your hand in front of you and kind of moving them or looking at them, and it's just very methodical and very slow, and the pacing is just it's just unexpected for me. I didn't know what to expect, but yeah, opening drawers, finding things in there. Sometimes you're not sure if they're useful or not. But there's some that seem to be pretty important, but there's no clues on what to do with them yet. Right. And
right.
So when it comes to puzzle centric or adventure game centric stuff in a simulated world like this, as they're trying to do, I'm a little worried about that in the future if I'm not going to use a guide, because really there's not a lot of telegraphing on what to do with this X thing yet, so hopefully it's obvious. We'll see. But I have so many things in my inventory now. I'm a little worried that I won't be able to figure out what to do with all of them. But then my favorite one that I was telling Brett is there's actually two examples that I love about how much attention to detail they put in the game. One is, for whatever reason, which I found out eventually why, you can take every picture off of the wall and look behind it. And there's this pretty elaborate animation with pacing to the animation where he puts his hands on the picture frame and he pauses for a beat to build up some anticipation, and then he moves the picture really quickly away from the wall, like almost like he's trying to surprise something behind it. Like, what's under that?
He's trying to catch the little man in the refrigerator.
And then he moves it to the side, and he's looking to see if there's something behind it. But every sort of like step in an interaction in this game, and we'll talk about this in dialogue as well, which is also surprising to me, usually requires a button press. So you move the frame and you're looking at the wall. There's nothing on the wall. It's literally a blank, terrible texture of a wall, and you have to press a button to put it back. So it's just to the degree. And so I'm going around the whole house moving very dramatically, moving these things to see what's behind them. And of course, eventually I am rewarded with that, but every picture you can do that with, every drawer you can open, and then the other simple small one, and then I'll shut up about this, is you can open both sides of closets. You can open one side and then close it, and then you can move to the other side because it's, there's two sliding doors. Uh-huh. You can move to the other one and open it. I have yet to find anything in closet that is useful to me, but they let you do it, and there's art in each, on each side. So yeah, I just like what?
Well, and I think that that's part of the point at the time. Like when you're able to like look at his hand or whatever, or look at these things on the wall or zoom in on things. I think part of the point is look at what we can do now.
Yeah,
with the power of the Dreamcast, right? I mean, this feels sort of endemic of the era of, oh, we've moved a new generation. It's one of the first titles on this new generation of titles. It's a different sort of thing than you've ever seen before. Look how realistic everything is. Never mind that none of it, but very little of it is actually interesting. the mere fact that you can do all of this stuff is the inherently interesting thing, or they're making an argument that it is.
No, I think it's a good point.
And I think that's been borne out, right? I mean, Gone Home is that game where it's like there are things all over the place that you can look at, and all of the game is taking place in your head. I mean, all of it. Much of the game is taking place in your head. There's definitely some mechanical stuff or whatever, but for the most part, I'm just looking at stuff. I'm building up a story in my head about Ryo's life and his house and his relationships there and whatever little memories he has and things like that from just examining those things. And that is very forward thinking at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I feel like to your point about like of the time and what people were trying to push, there's moments when I feel like it's almost tech demo like, you know what I mean? Where they're sort of showing what you can do. And you look at this game now, and I think a lot of players, especially younger players, wouldn't see that filter, right? Because they're like, well, things have moved on so much, right? You have GTA 3 after this, and like things have progressed so far beyond this. But if you put it in its time, there is a lot of stuff here that, and it's one of the points of our podcast is to talk about these older games and to see if we can sort of talk even generally or casually about some of the influences that these games had on other games. And you probably, I've been surprising myself on how many things in here I think did influence people to, they, like we talk about often, they would maybe take one portion or one aspect of the game and expand upon it. It's not like they're trying to recreate Shenmue exactly, but there's things in here that when you have something that is trying, like you said, to push the boundaries, even if it doesn't completely succeed or nail all of the sort of execution of that stuff, if it plants the seed of an idea of somebody else to say, well, what if we did it this way, in a different genre, then it still is going to be an influential thing. It's just so crazy, so weird. I'm trying to think
it's pretty extraordinary. Go ahead. You were trying to think of something?
Well, I was just trying to think of other stuff in the house that I wanted to mention, but yeah, you go ahead first.
Well, yeah, I mean, I looked under the sink. There's some drawers there's sliding doors that you can open. I guess it's just doors you can open beneath the sink. There's nothing under there. There is one place where there's a cockroach.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just goes, oh, it's just a cockroach.
Yeah.
But it spends so much time to like animate the cockroaches there, and then it animates away, and then he stops and he says something.
Blows my mind.
It's hilarious. Yeah.
And that's where it hits the simulation feel, that again, when people would describe this game to me, I don't feel like anyone would ever say the word simulation.
Right.
And I don't know why, and maybe I just wasn't a good listener or whatever, but it's clearly they're trying, the house is a good example because it is a microcosm of the game where, it is a fully functioning house. And like I said, you can open both sides of a closet for whatever reason, but you can, and then you expand that upon exiting the house into the world, and you basically are doing the same stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. You go out into the world, and I think when we say simulation, often what we mean is sort of clockwork.
Yeah.
Right. And like that there are systems that are interacting, and this is not really that. This is more of a very elaborately scripted game, where every individual NPC or building or what have you keys into the time of day, maybe the point at which you're in the story. So it's not a simulation in the sort of the sense of actually trying to code up everything sort of as a systems level thing. Right. The distinction I make is basically they're writing out schedules for when things are going to happen, which is a sort of simulation, right? I mean, you're always simulating to some degree, right? But no, it's not a simulation in the sense that these are characters who have some simulated wants or needs or anything like that they then try to fulfill. It's like, no, your job is, you're going to appear here. I mean, literally, if you're watching things at particular times of transition, like door signs will go from closed to open just as an immediate texture swap, for example. So there's sort of a level of simulation here, which is really just very, very elaborate, probably per character scripting. That I think might be a little systemic in ways that we'll have to talk about when we get there. But the systems are very light.
I agree with you. Yeah, and I definitely don't want people, because we do talk about simulation in other aspects, and I think today it means something much different, especially when we have so many emergent and systemic only games, or ones that lean really heavily into it, say like a Far Cry or something. I don't know.
Right. And so much like physics, and right. I mean, we have so many like literal simulations of the world. Even our rendering is becoming closer and closer these days to how light actually moves through a scene. And right. So it's, so there's so many different ways in which we simulate reality now to achieve different sorts of effects, whether gameplay or visuals or what have you. When we call it a simulation of life, it's like a simulacrum of life, rather than something that's really trying to replicate life in the way that it functions. So that's I guess the distinction I'm looking for. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and I think in the only thing I'd add, and we can move on, is I think that what I mean by simulation, I think why it's tagged as a simulation, a life simulation, is really more from a player perception standpoint than what's actually like the Sims.
Simulated. It feels like it's Ryu's life, or Ryu's life, or Rio.
It's not consistently pronounced. It is Rio. It is Ryo. Yeah.
Versus some of the other similarly closely named characters in video games. But you get the feeling, even though it does feel also to me like a heavily scripted world, and I can kind of see why the development costs are so high because of the way that it seems like it's been built. Seems very, seems like a nightmare to keep all of that stuff going, working as these very elaborate sort of spaghetti scripts or what have you. It's impressive that they pulled it off eventually. But it's more the perception of the simulation.
And they're probably one of the first to try to do this in a way that is realistic to the real world of 1986. I think that's like I'm thinking of other games that have like elaborate timelines, like Majora's Mask or something like that, which is a few years later, even, I believe. Am I right about that? Might be around this time. I don't remember exactly when Majora's Mask came out. But in any case, it's that's a game where they're in a fantasy world. They're replicating a very small fantasy town. They can actually, it is pretty elaborately scripted, but it's scripted around a sort of Groundhog Day feel, where you're going to try to have the perfect day. Kind of another interesting game, and one we have to play one of these days.
Which one?
Majora's Mask.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's one of the few Zeldas I've never played.
Yeah, I know. Me too. I've played some of it, but I have never finished it. So
yeah.
We'll have to get around to that someday.
Well, and I think Time of Day specifically was one of those. We've talked about, and I think in probably every game that we've played, there's been sort of an era or a year where the industry was trying to crack a certain nut and kind of overcome some obstacle of giving a type of experience to the player. And Ocarina, right, had time theme as well, and on the Hyrule Field, it became nighttime.
Right, yep.
And so it was a common theme. GTA 3, comes out 2 years after this or something.
Yep.
And so it was just that, and now we take it for granted, right? Lots of games have it, even if it's not simulated in a sort of clock kind of way, but maybe, but that sort of sense of progression of time has become commonplace. But this is clearly one of the early games that was really trying to, a clock is there's very few things on your UI, on your front end, or on your HUD the whole time, and the clock is one of them, your watch, right? So time is clearly an important aspect. And then what's more, not to sort of jump around topics, but what's more is you can't actually manipulate time.
Right.
So that was a very important, distinct decision for them to make for, I guess, obvious reasons. It's still flabbergasting to me, but I guess I can see why. But every time
let's get into that, because I think with the time, as well as sort of getting to know the place, are really important things that this game is really about, at least so far here in the early going. So we've got everybody kind of on their schedules. And one thing I do really appreciate about open world games that have distinct senses of place is getting to know your way around. Like, I feel this way often with Assassin's Creed games, which are, set in real world locations generally. This game, certainly GTA 3, which we've talked about, you sort of start to get to know the place. Sometimes by necessity, you have to get from X to Y in a certain amount of time, and you have to repeat it multiple times. It just kind of grooves into your head. Oh, this is how I get from this point to this point in this world. But you just get to know the sense of a place. And that definitely happens here in a much slower kind of way. But because I'm going around with Rio in, was it Dubito? Is that what it's called? The neighborhood? Dobita? Yeah, something like that.
We're the worst.
Yeah, I know. Well, who cares?
No.
I don't care. But the little town where all the shops and the restaurants are, you get a sense of like, oh, this is the district that actually has the restaurants, and this is the one with the markets and the clothing stores, and the phone on the woman is sitting behind the desk with basically an open phone booth. What a weird concept that is. Uh-huh. The hamburger guy, it's just like, the hot dog. Oh boy, the hot dog guy.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, there's just this sense of getting to know this place, and like there are little like you are here like mall style maps at numerous places. They're very well pointed out. It's very obvious what they are. But you get to be like, oh, I know. You start to know by the time you're on your 5th or 6th day in this town where everybody is and what they're doing at different times of day. And that's kind of extraordinary, because I've lived at this address in Maryland for about 13 years, and I don't know any of that stuff about where I live.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet I know an awful lot about the blocks of Shenmue from 5 or 6 hours of game. And that's kind of wild.
Well, and as I mentioned, I started off being skeptical and kind of not really sure how I was going to feel about this game. But I think to your point about getting to know a place, the way that I put it in my notes, both for the place and the people, is I feel like I've started building a relationship with the game. On multiple different levels. And I think there's a macro topic there for lots of different games and games in general, that I think the good ones, whether it be learning the sort of spatial, the spatial layout of a place or what have you, could be various things. But in this case, it is very much like, as the more that I've built a relationship and a knowledge about this place and these people, the more the game is growing on me and starting to convince me that I'm not going to hate it in a good way. I'm starting to kind of, it's growing on me, right? And you're sort of getting to know somebody, and it's also, and as I've started to do a little bit, reading up on this before we started recording, I guess I didn't realize that one of its sort of things was that sort of clockwork nature of it, where people have routines. And as a side note, remind me, I want to ask you about the Bethesda games, because they were also supposedly sort of notorious about having this concept of people on a certain route, and they would kind of go on their route. And if you were to, go there at a certain time, they would always be there, kind of thing. I don't know if that's actually true or that happened, but that always had a sort of, there was a myth about that too. But in Shenmue's case, I, for whatever reason, had inadvertently sort of like been at the right place at the right time. And I saw the army surplus guy going home at the end of the day. And then for whatever, it was because I was trying to get to the tattoo parlor and kind of going back and forth around that section. So I'd been around the apartment building quite a bit, but I just happened to see, I'd happened to be there in the morning and the evening. And so I saw him going into his apartment at night. And then the next morning I saw him coming out of his apartment and going to work, and that stuff sometimes is scripted in very specific ways for specific reasons, but it wasn't in that case. And I had no business with that guy, but I now know where he lives. And I know I had talked to him earlier because I was trying to find Charlie. And so I knew where he was going. And when I, ran around the corner, he was at his shop. So that's pretty cool as a concept. And if I think to myself, because almost every apartment or house has a name on it that you can focus in on. Oh, and as a side note, we should talk about the focus mechanic too. I think there's actually something important about that I was surprised about. But, and then the previous district is a residential district. And so I think in some cases, people in that district leave the district and go into town. And if you go and talk to them, you'll name them by their name, and that's the name on their house. Go back there, so there's these routines happening. The drunk guy, shows up at night, and I've, talked to him a few times, and he clearly is a persona there. So, I don't know. It's fascinating. You're starting to sort of, when Ryo starts talking to people, there's clearly like a lot of people sort of recognize him and they say, "Oh, hi, Ryo-san, hello, how are you today?" And so now I'm starting to feel like him, that I'm a local, and people recognize him, of course, as a character, but as a player, like I'm starting to recognize them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that about the game too. I mean, there was definitely, I was trying to pick out of my notes, there was a point at which I was like, this is where the game hooked me. And I can't now remember what specifically it was, because I guess I didn't write it down. But it was a moment where, like, I guess it was with the warehouse, so it was pretty late. I had a theory. I was like, and it didn't bear fruit. But the fact that I had this thought was like not a thing that normally you would think about. And that was, I exhausted some obvious things to try as far as figuring out about this warehouse. And then I thought, I should talk to, I think his name is Karitu or something like that. But the guy who owns the, one of the stores, because I was like, well, he probably gets his stuff, via a warehouse. He probably knows where the warehouses are, right? And I started thinking along those terms instead of just doing basically the adventure game equivalent of a pixel hunt by going and literally talking to everybody. I now had some sort of targeted theories that I was testing, like, maybe this person knows, because it would make sense maybe that person knows. Now, they didn't bear fruit, but the mere fact that I believe that could work out feels like it will pay dividends. So that was definitely where I started to get hooked. As far as Bethesda games, and then I had another thing to pull in here that this kind of draws on. Bethesda games have historically had schedules for its characters, and indeed Skyrim does in the cities, I believe. So yeah, it's just a similar sort of scripting, like, at this time you need to go home or go to your house and lock the door and do things like that. And that's just partly how they're put together. The other game that this brought to mind, and really all the first games, that tried new things that were odd, are text adventures. And, some of the first open world games are effectively text adventures. And the one that this particularly calls to mind for a number of reasons is Deadline, the Infocom mystery game, where you are locked in a location until, I believe, 24 hours. Time progresses whenever you do something, I think 2 or 3 minutes passes or something like that. So everything you give into the parser, time passes. I can't remember exactly how much. And you have to it's one of those text adventure games where you have to basically play it a whole bunch of times to figure out where everybody is at different points of the day so that you can see important things happen, so that you can pick up on clues, so that you can solve the mystery.
Because you won't solve it the first time.
No way. Right. Absolutely not. Yeah. Because there's just no way to know where to be and what conversations to overhear. And like these two people happen to be there. I mean, I think one probably efficient way to play a game like that would be to pick some key locations and like literally just sit in that room the whole time and like write down at what time things happen and then start making a schedule for everybody. Okay, people are in this room. This person's in this room at this time, etc. And where did they come from? Because it describes literally where people come from and things like that.
That's crazy.
And it's very similar in the sense that all the characters have an explicit schedule. It's for a complete 24 or whatever hour period. There's a couple of these. I think one of them is also called Witness. Is another Infocom game that does something very similar. I think the location might be different, a different sort of place. And yeah, they're marvelous clockworks and impossibly difficult, right? Those are games that I could not, I know how to beat them, but I've never beaten them on my own. They're great walkthrough games.
Right.
But,
well, and
in this day and age, I
think your point about even that you were able to bring logic to how to find the warehouse is the sort of the kernel of the game in a way, right? That's sort of like what they're trying to do. I had trying to think, it was related to some of the Charlie thread. There were a couple times when I don't remember the exact examples, but there were a couple times when I was trying to put 2 and 2 together on who to talk to, because I didn't want to talk to every single person, and just pixel hunt it. And a lot of times those did pay off. Sometimes they didn't, but at the very least they usually had thought about something interesting for the person to say. And they would, they're kind of breadcrumbing you here and there. But, going to talk to the guys in the arcade who also had tattoos,
right.
For a while, they didn't actually, respond the way you wanted them to, but eventually they do. And so the theory sort of paid off. It was a little bit of a red herring for a bit, but they are trying to make that happen. So it'll be interesting to find this warehouse and to figure out how, they sort of, it's almost like a radar closing in on the answer, it feels like, because you sort of start talking to people and then the circle gets smaller as you get this key piece of information. And then and then you're narrowing how many options you really have. And then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you get to the actual location. So, versus say like a traditional, LucasArts adventure game or something you're looking at these inventory items and this pool of items that you have and trying to logic out from all the information you have, what goes with what. This is almost like a process of elimination or something. If it's not obvious.
Yeah, in that, I that is actually where I think one of the rare systems in this game is actually going on, is the basis of these conversations. Because if you pay attention to what people will answer, it feels to me like basically the game is keeping track of basically Rio's top 1 or possibly 2 things that he cares about right now.
Yeah, right.
And that anybody in the world could respond to that. And if they don't, they'll have some generic thing. They basically, I think it's like a series of sort of shells of information. Like, okay, for example, a good example would be Nozomi, right? This young woman who works at the flower shop. They go to school together. I guess Rio's like 16 maybe. And if you ask her about a number of things, you basically get advancement of her storyline with him rather than advancement of sort of the 3 blades or the different sort of other stuff that he's directly concerned about as far as the mystery of his father's death goes. But you have sort of, okay, well, if I don't have something to tell him about the thing that he's most interested in, fall back on some other thing that's, that would be important, maybe to this character. So with Nozomi, that would be something about their friendship or relationship or something like that. You can see that one getting set up as maybe something sad, in some way, some wistfulness, like he's too bent on revenge to notice the happiness that is right in front of him or something like that. I definitely get a tone like that from this game.
You got that cinematic after the tattoo, right, with her, where they talked about college. Did you get that?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she was like, maybe I'll go, and he's basically like, well, wherever I go, it'll have karate, right? Yeah. That was another line I wrote down at one point. Right. Wherever Tim Longo goes, it'll have karate.
Yeah. Well, and she's in. You may not have found it, but there's a picture in one of the drawers. I think it might be in his room.
I definitely didn't find it.
Yeah, and so she's in the picture. There's like there's 4 people total with 3 friends and him, and she's in the picture. So they seem to be close, and you can take the picture with you for whatever reason. But yeah, they seem to be close. They talked about going into college, so he might be 17 or something.
Yeah.
But so you're pointing about sort of like a state, almost like a very simple state, world state.
Yeah. So sort of not too dissimilar from like how Ultima games worked, where and they worked a little differently in that I think any character could respond to words that they knew. There were 2 words that were basically the starting point for any Ultima conversation in the old games, which were name and job. So this is like from Ultima, maybe like 4 onward. And the way the system worked was basically you'd go around and be sort of doing the adventure part of those games, which is like advancing the storyline. You'd learn something at a location, and they'd give you basically another word that was important. It might be the name of a location or what have you. And then you could ask other people about it, and they would have responses if they knew about it. So the player was discovering, so sort of the fun loop of that was the player was discovering important things, and was kind of keeping track in a notebook or whatever of important words to ask people about. Like, it might be the city of Moonglow. I've heard of the city of Moonglow. How do you get there or whatever? And people would tell you if you knew to ask. But if you didn't, as a player, know to ask that, it was just hidden from you. This is somewhat similar, except automated. It's, well, Rio knows what's important to him. So whenever he talks to people, he's going to say things like, do you know any Chinese people? Or whatever. Because that's the thing that's most important to him. And it basically keys into the notebook of whatever is the last thing in the notebook. Or maybe the last 2 things in the notebook. So I do feel like there's something going on there, or at least it was an organizing principle for them of how to, like, because nobody had really built games like this before, they had to figure out how to do it. And I feel like this was kind of their organizing principle. Like, we're going to write all the stuff that everybody knows, and then we're going to organize that to basically reuse Rio's key state, the things that he's most interested in at this moment that we track through the notebook. There's a lot of characters who will just say, I'm too tired right now, or what have you, to talk to you. That's their basically fallback of, I don't have anything else to say. That's the adventure game equivalent of, I'm going to say my last thing that I repeat now forever, to the end of time. So
every character seems to have that within their personality. Their last remaining. That's a good catch on that's a good call out to Ultima. I haven't played an Ultima game in so long. I forgot that's how it works, how the structure works. I mean, Underworld had some of that going on, but it wasn't the same type of thing.
Right. It's not really the focus. Yeah. Ultima Underworld's more about its tech. Yeah.
We really have to play an Ultima, like a traditional Ultima at some point.
I know 4 is probably the one, but
probably, yeah. But holy cow. I'm going to regret saying that. But did you notice, speaking of the notebook and the way that this stuff is parsing out, did you notice that the notebook has spaces in between?
Yes, and my assumption is I've missed things.
Yeah, me too. And so it's just crazy to me that the notebook is laid out in a way where every clue has a discrete location in the notebook.
Yeah.
And so, and because of there's some nonlinearity to the game where you can go and talk to somebody before, in a couple cases, I can't think of an example, but I feel like there's been a couple times when I've either happened upon somebody before I knew I should and maybe skip this.
I mean, I think you could go to the Chinese restaurant before you talk to anybody about, should I, you should talk to Chinese people. Like, there's sort of this progressive, like, I mean, a lot of that seems cleverly scripted in the sense that, the nearest people to where you learn maybe Chinese are involved somehow only will say, well, you should talk to Chinese people. And then as you go further afield, because you don't really have a sense of people yet, you'll get the, well, you should try Ajichi's restaurant or whatever. And then you go there and they're like, and you start to learn about the three blades and blah, blah, blah.
I have to say, I've really appreciated the cultural aspects of the story so far, especially the Japanese-Chinese stuff and relationship, because it's something that especially Westerners wouldn't, really pick up on and be aware of, but it is it is an important part of those two cultures. And so I didn't anticipate, and the reason I'm bringing this up is there's sort of a depth to that because it's a modern day setting where they can get into some of that stuff, which, to be honest, a lot of games just stay away from, especially these days, right? Nobody wants to deal with culture, clashes and sort of that sort of, and I don't think they're handling it, very adeptly, of course.
No, they're not.
But the fact that it exists at all, the concept that they're actually talking about these two cultures, is interesting because it's I think a lot of Westerners don't really see that relationship very often. So I've appreciated that.
There's also sort of cultural, there's just natural sort of, they're talking about sort of, integrating into a foreign culture as well. Like, well,
exactly.
I guess that's what you're getting at. It's like, the three blades are three jobs that you can do without tons of like licensing or skills or whatever to go from this place to that place. And food is another way that commonly, sort of refugee or immigrant experiences go, right? So there's a Chinese restaurant as well. I think that's all terrific. Like, it's not well handled for sure, but to even incorporate it is really is unusual for sure. Like you said, it's a thing that we shy away from even today. Yeah, I think it's definitely ham-fisted, but it's kind of nice that it's there, and I was surprised that they even were talking about that stuff. So that kind of leads me to think that Suzuki does have some personal feeling, personal sort of goals with the game as well. Don't know that to be the fact, but feels like there's enough going on there where he or the team have some things that they're trying to sort of say, and to to simulate sort of a modern setting is also often just sort of goes directly into the action direction and just avoids this altogether. But this game doesn't have that for the most part, at least yet. And so we've had a couple moments that we won't cover this episode, but a lot of your time is spent with people and talking to people, and so it would be something that you could see people just developers really just avoiding. So it's been nice. Have you played any of the Yakuza games? I have. I'm glad you brought that up because I've played Yakuza 4.
Yeah,
very similar in some ways. Like, this game does not exist. Yakuza games do not exist, I don't think, without this game. Because they definitely simulate like this, whatever, 4 to 8 square city blocks or whatever of a particular district in a particular Japanese city. And it's all crime focused, but it does a lot of the same stuff where there are characters that have more or less schedules. In some cases, it's just kind of character types because they're a lot more populated. There's a lot more sort of random characters walking around just because of advance of technology. So there's more of that kind of mix of like a GTA or Assassin's Creed feel of like there's some character types that are just kind of always moving around, and one might be randomly picked to like get in a fight with you and things like that at different times because there's a lot more action as well. But there are sort of like authored storylines that are just kind of littered throughout. In Yakuza 4, there was a point at which I became the manager of a dojo where I was training fighters in different ways, and they all had their own storylines, and I was taking them to tournaments to fight and like trying to maximize the dojo's honor or something. What's that?
That's the same stuff. It's totally
exactly. It's the same stuff. It's the same stuff.
Is that Sega
and
as well?
it's written much the same way.
Is are the Yakuza games Sega as well? Am I remembering?
Oh, I think they might be. I think they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking that up, but I think you're right, actually.
I'm glad you played one because I haven't played the Yakuza.
Yeah, it is Sega.
Yeah, but that came to mind when people described Yakuza to me or on a podcast or what have you. So, I think that series does owe a lot to this game. Then,
yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up because I had made a note of it, but it's so far down in my notes that I hadn't seen it yet. Because I have a lot of notes. Because I was actually taking notes about what to do for a long time before I realized the notebook was so explicit. Although there's a lot of times one of the things with the notebook is that you can't refer to it like in a conversation or whatever. I mean, not that you have all kind of dialogue options or anything, but I just like wanted to be able to look at it. And for phone numbers, like you have to copy the phone numbers out because you can't actually it doesn't dial it for you. You've got to move his hand around on the rotary dial. Yeah, so for kids at home, that's what a phone looked like in 1986. I mean, so I guess I'll make my last thought about the Japan-China stuff before we move on to feedback. This could be timely enough that the conflict between Ryo's father and Landi or whatever goes back to the Chinese-Japanese War that was just around World War II.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It makes me think that possibly, or, and this is another thing that Japanese stories do to some degree is allegorize this stuff. For example, Godzilla being the most kind of famous thing known in the West of being sort of an allegory for, the nuclear threat, basically. Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me that it might have something to do with that. Though I have no idea if it's going in that direction. I just kind of like off the top of my head of like, what would be kind of age appropriate for that character? He might be, I don't know. He looks too young to be old enough to have been in World War II. His father does. So it's kind of hard to tell, but I don't know, maybe something, maybe it's the children of something. I don't know. It was something that came to mind. Anyway, let's we're almost an hour and 15 in. Let's put a pin in it there. We're going to keep playing it. I have no idea. I think I'm just going to tell you, I think we have there. I think there are 3 main locations in this game. And this is the first. And I think probably we want to at least get to and maybe start to complete the second, whatever the second area is. I think I feel like that will be where the warehouses are. That we're actually really on the cusp of doing that. That's my sense. Looking at times to beat for this game, it's 20 hours or less. So I think that makes sense. So we'll aim to do that without being more specific, and then I'll just be in touch with you.
Did you go to the fortune teller?
I did once, yes, and got a hint.
Okay, yeah. So
it didn't help. I already knew what I was doing. Or I think I got a hint maybe about the club I was supposed to go to, and I already knew. I just had missed it because it was in a weird alleyway that I just, for whatever reason, just visually didn't pick out and didn't notice. It was literally where the game said it was, and I just couldn't see it.
Yeah, I happened upon it too. No, when I went, the clue did help me, and the reason I was going to bring it up is just
if I get stuck.
If either of us get stuck, but specifically to support your sort of theory about how the sort of
topics,
the master script works or whatever, if they have a master script relating to all these other, connected to all these other scripts, because there's definitely a state that the fortune teller would, they would give you a clue of something that you're supposed to do next, and they have to know that kind of from a some sort of systemic perspective.
Yep. So, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
But yes, Onward, this crazy game.
Yeah, it's one of those games that I did not expect to, although I found the last hour pretty frustrating for a couple of reasons. It mostly having to do with Warehouse Number 8. For the most part, I actually was kind of really, really digging it. So much like when I played Yakuza 4 about a year ago. So, so I look forward to playing more. Let's turn now to feedback. We actually have a review. This time it's short and sweet. I want to let people know to please go out and find that Apple Podcast app or whatever podcast app you use, and throw us a review that way. Someone had written in a while back, by the way, about Stitcher, and I'm gonna reach out to that again, and maybe we can get onto that. But look for more about that in the future. I just wanted to let that person know, if they're listening, that I have not forgotten, and I will be checking into it soon as the year winds down. But yeah, go ahead and give us that review, sir.
I have an email. Is that what you were?
You also have a review right above where it says email. There's a section that says
there
review.
Is one sentence. Okay, here we go.
Short, yes. Short
Subject is Love It from Jesus Freak, 144,000.
Yeah.
I don't know. What is that reference to?
I don't think it's necessarily a reference to anything.
Okay. It's just a number. What a great podcast. Perfect balance between active listening and the type of podcast I can fall asleep to. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Jesus Freak.
I assume in that case that I am the attentive, active listening, and that you are the putting to sleep.
I'm the lull you to sleep voice.
That's my assumption. Yeah, I'm much more nasally. I assume that I keep people awake.
I'm with you on that. I agree, and I support your theory.
Okay. Thank you for that review, Jesus Freak 144,000, or as I like to call you, 1,000 gross. I have an email called Game Economy, subject Game Economies, from Eric Fox. This was sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. He says, "Hi guys, really enjoyed hearing your discussion of MMO economies and thought I'd share a bit from my time with Dark Age of Camelot. The best gear in that game was crafted by other players. Players who hit the max crafting ability and could craft the best gear were often very rich, but had little to spend their money on. Moreover, to get some gear crafted, one had to find a crafter, message him or her, and then negotiate a price. However, once Dark Age of Camelot launched the housing expansion, everything changed. All the rich crafters suddenly had a way to ostentatiously display their wealth. It was a huge money sink. Suddenly, they had a huge incentive to produce way more product to earn money and enhance their houses. In addition, the houses could each have an NPC who would sell the crafters items, and players could even search for what gear was available on various NPCs from a central location. The upshot of all this is that prices on gear plummeted. Before housing, you had to pay an insane price or hope you knew someone, likely a fellow guild member, who could make your gear. After housing, gear became cheap and plentiful." Eric in Washington, D.C. I knew that would be right up your alley because it's one of those things that only happens in MMO economies.
Yeah. It's that, and it's a whole series of systems that has always been too intimidating for me to really fully embrace, like auction house and crafting economy. I always would do plenty of crafting and I would max my crafting out, but to engage in that really wholeheartedly, you have to really enjoy it and want to do it, but you have to devote a lot of your time to it. And I was much more of get out there and adventure, but those stories of like the way that the economies sort of ebb and flow and for what reason have always been so crazy to me. And I think, to be honest, WoW has always distilled all of that stuff down a little bit more than they should, and simplified it in a lot of ways. And also, a lot of times, it's not the most valuable stuff anyway. Mm-hmm. If you're going to spend the time playing the game, it's often even more advantageous to just go raiding and stuff. And so I feel like it's always been a weird balance
Yeah, but I mean, they have so much that's like bind on pickup and stuff, some of the best gear, right? So it's like just picking it up means you can't sell it now.
They could, no, and agreed, no, that's been a choice for them pretty much all along the way. They don't have to have it that way, but
right.
They clearly know that crafting is not for everybody, right. And if they were to force the best gear to be, craftable, and as Camelot and EverQuest did to some degree in some cases, then, they would torpedo the fun factor, I think, for a lot of people because they hit that wall. And so it's definitely, I think for their goals, it's a very smart decision. I just think it's been a bummer because I feel like crafting in WoW has always been kind of an appendage more than anything else,
Yeah. I mean, there's always people yelling out in Stormwind or Ironforge or any of the other, the Horde cities.
Yeah.
I've got, I can do this if you've got mats or, whatever, a lot of enchanters and things like that. People opening lock boxes. So there is some like interaction between players that it encourages, but it's not a lot. And of course the auction house makes that just not a thing, right? You just go to a place and if there's a thing you want, like, you have to know. But still it has led to interesting stories even in WoW. I can remember back in 2006 or 7 or so, on one of the servers, 2 guys actually cornered the auction house. They owned the whole auction house. So they were able to then just set prices on whatever they wanted to sell. They just bought everything that went onto the auction house. They got that rich. And then were just selling everything at exorbitant rates. So I knew somebody who had 2 accounts literally so he could manipulate the markets on the auction house. So he was a guy who did finance by day, and at night he did insider trading in WoW. Can't comment on whether he did that during the day. So
holy cow. Yeah,
a lot of stuff in that. And if you look at Eve, theirs is even nuttier. So
well, and Eve, I think Eve is the example of like that being more of a dominant part of the game and encouraging it in different ways. And there's definitely been great stories that have come out of it. Including out of game stuff, right? With the gray market and all the stuff they had to do there with selling gold and, all that kind of stuff. But then,
and the real world companies that led to, right? And some people who actually got fairly rich off of selling gold. Like I remember there's a famous article about that. I was a Chinese gold farmer or something like that ages ago. And maybe Kill Screen or something. I'd have to go track that down. But if I can find a link, I'll put it in the show notes.
Well, and it also, things have changed quite a bit from classic. Classic crafting was a lot more important, and there's, you have those people yelling in zones. But modern is just, it's just not what it used to be, I feel, at least.
Yeah. All right, why don't you take us to the second mail?
Okay. So is McKendy is
yes.
That's
Aaron
Evers?
Yes.
Okay, I did not. We saw him online. We talked, but you said it was. I guess I just missed it. It was Aaron. So awesome. Okay, subject: WoW Classic from McKendy/Aaron, one of our stalwarts here. Hello, Aaron. Glad you're playing. You guys are killing me, he says. There's a subway train from Ironforge to Stormwind for free. Look for the giant spinning gear door in the Dwarf District in Stormwind and the Gnome area in Ironforge. I know time can be an issue for you guys with the pod and other obligations, so get you some mods. As before I continue, I did use and do use that. I just think it's a little bit cumbersome enough to not want to do it very often.
Well, he's also going to come back to that. So read the whole thing, and then I thought maybe we might talk about mods.
Okay, yeah. The Twitch desktop client has WoW mod support built in. You can one-click install from there. Questy will show you where quests are, your level, and where to go to complete them, as in where the enemies are to kill. There are several others that may make things more enjoyable in the interest of time. I'm playing again, and I have a mid-20 mage. Soloing with a warrior sucks. That is my main, so I know. Note, and this is a reply. Okay, I guess I should have listened to more than 15 minutes.
Yeah, that note is for me. He sent 2 mails, and this is the follow-up. So, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I should have listened to more than 15 minutes. It sounded like you guys walked from Ironforge to Stormwind and didn't know about the tram, but you talked about it later. Apologies. Offer still stands to party up if you guys ever do need a body to fill your group. I'm about to start vacation. McKendy, which is his character name, Aaron Evers, the great Aaron Evers. So thanks for sending that in. Yes, we did use the tram. Of course, you kind of, walking from one to the other at that level would be quite an adventure, which, by the way, I have done before.
I believe it.
On the Horde side. But yeah, I think flying over is fun too, because you just get to see it. But of course you don't have an unlock, so you have to use the tram anyway. You don't have
that would be a tough walk. But mods, yeah. So I've been going vanilla modless because I wanted to get the sort of original experience. And I know and that is basically how I played. I think the only time I ever installed mods was because you told me to, because it was required for something that some raid we were gonna do, or some like 5-man or something. Yeah, I don't remember the specifics, but it had a lot to do with like putting up health information above everybody. I was a druid at the time, so I was probably off healing or something like that. So it needed to be very clear when I needed to be doing things. And I would have needed that clarity. But those are really the only mods I ever used. And we do try to kind of stick to the original as released game as much as possible. This is a really unusual opportunity to be able to play vanilla WoW Classic from a live service game that's been going on for however 15 years. And trying to capture the original feel has been part of it. So, although modding is also a thing, right? So I don't know. I mean, I only ever played it that way, so it's basically unmodded. So for me, it's like, well, I'm going to try to play it the way I played it.
Yeah, for me too. Yeah, no, I'm very familiar with mods as well, and the thoughts occurred to me a couple times, but same reason. Yeah, I think it's actually for the cast important to live through the pain of what we're living through. Even though it's funny to say that, because it's a lot less painful than, say, an EverQuest or something. So, which I do think we should dabble in at least a little bit so we can compare the two. But no, I'm trying to play en natural on purpose, because I was running with lots of different mods, Auctioneer and the Questy and others, quest-centric stuff back in the day, Deadly Boss mod, things like that for grouping in raids and stuff. And Twitch client, as he mentioned, which is a little bit of history, does have all the mod stuff integrated quite well. But the reason is because they bought a company called Curse, which used to be the ultimate sort of layer for mods that you would have on your computer to keep everything updated and cataloged and everything. And then Twitch,
I remember that. Yeah.
So now they own that stuff. So the stuff you see in the Twitch client is just the client, bolted onto Twitch. So that's sort of how that came to be. And
I do remember that, because I remember that having to install that too. I wouldn't have been able to pull that out, but yeah, I remember that was a thing. Like, install this first, and then right, and then pick these or whatever. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you can turn them on, which ones you want on and off and stuff. And the game and to Brett's point, the game is the UI is very moddable, and that was one of its secret weapons, in my opinion, for allowing players to really expand upon the experience, but keep the simulation, sound and watertight. It was a safe place for people to dabble. And there are so many mods over the course of 15 years of this game. And Curse was just a few folks who were making these mods, and they just were the best at it. And then they just started, kind of making their own little mini company out of it. So, but
they got the cash out.
Yeah, exactly. It is good for them, But to be honest, even in modern, where I'm not trying to play in this sort of for the podcast and specifically, I often turn off mods because I kind of just want to keep things as pure as possible. I will turn on Deadly Boss mod for specific situations for raiding and stuff, but I kind of like to see what Blizzard does with the UI, because what they often do is they'll take mods that were very popular and they'll start integrating them into the game officially, but with their own designs. And so I kind of like to see what they start doing over time. So I don't run with them as much as I used to, even today.
Yeah. I also like that it's forcing me to scour the map and things like that. I discovered in the Thelsamar, I guess that's was that Loch Madan or Dunmarog? I guess Dunmarog. Anyway, in the Thelsamar area, I found a place that I remembered finding ages ago, 13 years ago when I last played, or whatever it was. I had found this place and gone, oh man, I can't believe this was here all the time. And then I had that exact same experience again. And when I was walking up to it, I was like, oh man, I remember this place. There's like 2 quests here or something, but it was really funny to find it again, because there was a little spot in the map. I'm like, oh, I should be able to go there. I don't know if that's just like a transition to another region or something. I don't know what's east of there. It's some kind of deserty looking place, I think. Searing Gorge, yeah. Okay.
But it's locked, right? But yeah.
Yeah, no, I was like, wow, there must be something over there, and I went and found it. I was like, oh yeah, I remember finding this last time. And didn't have many Alliance characters, so yeah, it must have been a really unique thing, which of course I had forgotten, so it was fun to experience that again. Anyway, I'm gonna hit the last email and then we will call it a night. Strap in, it's a little long. This is from Ashton. RPG economies and Morrowind. Ashton says, hey, Tim and Brett, I just finished listening to your latest WoW episode, number 2, and your conversation about the different challenges of designing an in-game economy for single-player versus multiplayer games reminded me of one of my favorite role-playing experiences in Morrowind. Morrowind was my first entry in the series, and when I picked it up, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. It's pretty typical for a single-player game in that you end up with more money than you know what to do with, but early on, I felt like I was constantly broke. Much like life. At one point in the game, I'd spent my last coin on some gear for my character, and I couldn't afford to fast travel to the town I needed to for my next quest. So I set off on foot from the town Aldrun with only the clothes on my back and headed for Vivek, or Vivek, I don't know, the game's largest city. I don't know the Elder Scrolls lore. I don't know how to pronounce this stuff. Anyway, along the way, I encountered a blighted rat who attacked and infected me with its disease. The disease sapped away my strength to the point that I was over-encumbered just by the gear I was wearing and couldn't move. I didn't have a potion or a spell to cure the disease, so I ultimately had to drop all my gear and run naked through the wilds while avoiding all the enemies I could to Vivek. But when I got there, I couldn't even afford a potion to cure myself.
Oh, man.
Eventually, I managed to find some alchemy equipment in the Mages Guild, and I learned that I could afford the last ingredient that I needed to craft my own Cure Blight potion once I figured out the game's alchemy mechanics, after which I had to trek all the way back to my gear again on foot. It was an experience that was more immersive than just about anything I'd played up until that point, and it's part of the reason I fell in love with the game. It's also the type of experience I could only have because the game didn't give me an easy way out of it. Other titles in the series allow you to fast travel essentially for free, and that's a much more user-friendly mechanic. But if I'd had access to that, I'd never have had the incredible experience I did. You touched on that somewhat precarious balance in game design, which seems like a challenge that devs will never be able to, quote, solve in a perfect sense. But Brett's comment about having to traverse the game's massive map on foot was definitely reminiscent of my own experience in Morrowind, if maybe a little less dramatic. Anyway, I just want to share my little story with you. Thanks for all the work you do on the show. You guys are great. Ashton.
That's amazing.
It's a great story. Yeah.
I mean, technically he could have reloaded, right?
Well, in theory.
But he didn't.
You don't want to give up that experience.
No. I don't either. No, and I'm glad he didn't reload, but it's just so funny that he, to his point about like that delicate balance that we talked about before, it is in a way kind of an unsolvable problem in that a lot of times you want to try I hate to boil it down this much, and you can debate me on this, but it kind of ends up, oftentimes I feel like the conversations I've been on projects where we get into this sort of category of debates, it almost comes down to a business problem, because it's an audience problem. And it's like, how big do you want your audience? How broad do you want it? How user-friendly do you want it? And thus you're going to start making these decisions. But if you can commit and set appropriate goals for the audience that you want, and thus the business that you want, you can keep this stuff in. It's okay. You can make games like this. And I think the resurgence of this stuff from the Dark Soulsification of things.
You're going there.
Yeah. That's what we do every episode. Drink. Let me just say, geez now too. I just, it's okay. It's just convincing people to keep that stuff in. And we need more stories like his. I'm blanking on his name. What was his name?
Ashton. Yeah.
Ashton. We need more stories like Ashton's, so developers can remember the joy of not necessarily punishing systems, but having a balance where it forces players to make hard decisions, which is what Brett said when we talked about sort of being, strapped for cash in WoW, which doesn't happen anymore for the most part for a lot of players, the way they've balanced it, where, you can't even buy your skills or your abilities. And so you're having to make hard decisions. And that's, in my opinion, better. So anyway, I'll shut up about that. But that's a great story.
I mean, it is a business case. It's also an artistic choice, right? And I think that you can marry the two. You just have to be realistic about what your budget can be if you're going to make a decision that's going to close off,
right.
Close off some part of your audience. And you just have to be realistic about that. I actually was watching Game Maker's Toolkit. I just had it on the background. I was catching up on videos that I'm ages behind. I was like, I wanted to watch some of those. And I was watching a series that he did about the Dead Space games, and I particularly enjoyed that because I recently played Dead Space 2. And he talked about going through, he did a video on each of these, how the game went from mostly survival horror, lightly action, but mostly survival horror, to like balancing more towards action, but still horror, to going pure action over the course of those 3 titles. And then also pointed out what I think it was Frank Gibeau, was head of EA at the time, was saying about what the audience needed to be for that game to make it worth continuing to do. And he said something like 5 million. And the risk there, as Mark Brown points out, is that, well, they wanted to reach for more, and they really basically messed up their game. And all the things that made Dead Space work pretty well, that were even pretty well represented in Dead Space 2, were just totally messed up in Dead Space 3. They just rebalanced it for action. They so a lot of the things that work really, really well in the game, that are creepy and effective, but maybe limit its audience, were gone. And so a lot of the moments that you might have had where you just managed to eke out a win with almost no health left, because the challenges are such, and I played those games with just the one weapon besides, because that's the way I am. You just have these very difficult encounters that you're trying to figure out your way through. And if you're the type of player to tough that out, that can be a really rewarding experience, but it limits the audience. And honestly, if they had stuck with this sort of Dead Space 2 model, they might have been able to grow that audience by kind of pitching it as that, like deliberately saying, no, we're not making the choice to make it this other thing. We're deliberately trying to do this different thing and trying to make the story. I mean, as you pointed out, Dark Souls and its descendants have done well. But they're also pitching, they're not going to sell 10 million units. So they're making appropriate business decisions to sustain the series. But they're doing quite well. And yeah, I mean, it's a decision you have to make. You have to be conscious about, there's definitely a sense, and some publishers are this way, where their business model really just admits of one way of doing things, and that's just, it's got to be X, or it's not worth us doing. Because of opportunity cost, there's a lot that factors into those decisions. But hey, an indie team to sell 500,000 units of a thing, if the team is small, Sure, they'd love to have that. So you've got to just really kind of, I think there's lots of opportunities there artistically to be like, you know what, there is an audience for this sort of thing. It's underserved. There are not tons of survival horror games really in a given year. There's more indie ones than there used to be. So there's definitely some, but it's not a huge, there's not tons of them coming out every year. There never have been. And, we could have more psychological horror along the lines of Silent Hill 2, from my point of view. And if they looked at basically that fidelity, I'd be perfectly fine with it if they delivered that kind of great experience. So, so I'm putting that call out there for folks who are listening, developers out there, get your Silent Hill 2s going. I want to play them. But yeah, I mean, you just have to be aware that your audience is not every person with a PS4 or an Xbox. It's a much smaller audience, and just scale appropriately. Figure out how to reach them. But anyway, that's I guess that's our cast for the week. We already talked earlier about what we're going to play up to. Thanks to those folks, Ashton and Mackenzie and Eric, for writing in. And for our Jesus Freak for the review. We appreciate having those. I will try to remember. I forgot to do it this week, so sorry. If you were watching me stream at twitch.tv/Brett Douville, you saw how far I played in Shenmue, and you'll get that opportunity again this coming weekend. Or you can try to induce me to tell you on the Twitter feed for the podcast at Dev Game Club. On Twitter, you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end,
where I'm sure he'll be nattering on about some nonsense here as the holidays approach. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy playing games this week. And good night.
Good night.
I'm sorry. Don't know why I said you'd be nattering on about holiday stuff. I'm just tired.
No, I might.
You might well do that. Christmas Yoda.